Welcome to Asian Horror and Crime. Most people see Asia for its bright lights and ancient traditions. But if you look closer, in the places most people avoid, there are stories. Stories of things that shouldn't exist, and people who've done things you won't believe. Tonight, we're going to the dark side of the continent, so, dim the lights, check under your bed, and maybe don't look out your window. Because tonight, we're diving deep into the grim tapestry of Asian horror and crime. Stay scared, folks. Today, we dive into one of the darkest chapters in South Korean criminal history. The man at the center of this case is Kang Ho Sun, a narcissistic serial offender whose actions sent shockwaves through the land of the morning calm in the mid-2000s. Today, we will break down the detailed timeline of his case, reconstructed from various South Korean criminal investigation reports. Kang Ho Sun was born in 1969. To the outside world, he was a well-groomed man who didn't look threatening at all. He came from a stable, well-to-do family that owned vast acres of land. His neighbors knew him as a polite, handsome man who seemed to have a deep affection for animals. However, behind that mask, Kang had a turbulent personal life, having been married 4 times. His shortest marriage, to his third wife, lasted only 2 months. Kang worked as a truck driver. When South Korea was hit by the financial crisis, he made a calculated move. He set fire to his own truck to claim the insurance money. He used that payout to open a restaurant, only to burn it down later for yet another insurance claim. With the accumulated insurance funds, he started a new venture. Initially, his neighbors believed he was running a dog farm. As it turned out, it was a facility where he processed animals for the meat trade. It was here that he began exercising extreme and brutal methods of taking life. This business lasted for 3 years. It was during this period that he reportedly discovered a distorted sense of satisfaction in his actions, marking the chilling beginning of his path toward more heinous crimes. The tragedy of 2005 served as the ultimate turning point, the moment Kang Ho Sun transformed from a petty criminal into a lethal financial predator. Many of South Korea's leading criminal profilers, including those who interrogated him, believe that the successful manipulation of this specific incident gave him the distorted confidence he needed to begin his spree of violence. Let's look at the chilling details of this arson incident. As mentioned earlier, Kang had been married 4 times, maintaining a history of volatile and unstable relationships. However, his 4th marriage to a woman identified by her surname, Chang, appeared different on the surface. Chang was the daughter of a relatively wealthy property owner, and to the neighbors, Kang presented himself as the ideal son-in-law. He was often seen helping in his mother-in-law's fields and appeared deeply devoted to his wife. But behind this carefully constructed mask, investigators later discovered that this marriage was merely a chess piece in a much larger, darker game. Months before the incident, it was revealed that Kang had enrolled his wife in 4 separate life insurance policies. He meticulously ensured that these policies included specific clauses for accidental death or fire. In a chilling coincidence, the fire broke out just 5 days after the final insurance policy officially went into effect. Legally, this was an immediate red flag for the insurance companies, but Kang had orchestrated a scenario so seemingly perfect that he believed he was untouchable. On the night of October 30, 2005, the inevitable arrived. Around 3 a.m., a massive blaze broke out at his mother-in-law's home in Ansan. During the official interrogation, Kang told investigators that he woke up to thick smoke and immediately leaped out of a second-story window to seek help. Tragically, his wife and mother-in-law perished in the fire due to severe inhalation and critical injuries. They never made it to the exit. Still in 2005, forensic teams did find traces of accelerants, flammable liquids, at the scene. However, Kang maintained a rock-solid alibi and delivered a chillingly convincing performance as a man shattered by grief. At the time, the police concluded the fire might have been an accident, potentially fueled by various agricultural chemicals stored in the house by his mother-in-law. Due to a lack of eyewitnesses and the fact that fire forensics were not as advanced as they are today, the case was officially closed as an accidental tragedy. Once cleared of all suspicions, Kang collected a massive insurance payout totaling 480 million won, approximately $505,000. This blood money was then used to fund a specific lifestyle. First, he purchased a high-end luxury sedan, the very vehicle he would later use to lure unsuspecting individuals during his serial spree. Second, he established a dog farm. And finally, he adopted the persona of a wealthy playboy, using his newfound riches and charm to entice new targets into his orbit. After successfully evading the consequences of the 2005 incident and pocketing hundreds of millions in insurance money, Kang Ho Sun entered the deadliest phase of his life. Between December 2006 and December 2008, the Gyeonggi province area became his personal hunting ground. Now, let's examine Kang Ho Sun's tactics and patterns during this period, a strategy often referred to as the gentleman predator. Kang was not the type of offender who would immediately ambush targets in dark alleys with physical force. Instead, he was a master of psychological manipulation. He used his insurance payouts to purchase a high-end luxury sedan. In South Korean society, owning such a vehicle is often associated with high social status and trustworthiness, and he used this vehicle as his primary bait. Inside the car, he intentionally displayed photos of himself smiling alongside his pet dogs. His goal was to neutralize the survival instincts of his targets. The logic he planted in their minds was simple: if a man loves dogs, he couldn't possibly be dangerous. His selection of targets was highly specific. He targeted women waiting alone at secluded bus stops or those who appeared to be struggling to find transportation late at night. He would pull up and politely offer them a ride, often using the excuse that he was simply heading in the same direction. The moment a target entered the vehicle, the power dynamic shifted entirely into Kang's hands. He would immediately activate the central locking system, ensuring there was no escape, before driving them to locations he had scouted in advance, usually secluded forest trails or abandoned construction sites. Investigators determined that in almost every instance, the victims were subjected to severe physical and personal violations before their lives were taken. This pattern revealed that Kang's motives went beyond the act of taking a life. He sought total dominance and a distorted sense of gratification. Kang's methods were chillingly consistent and highly specific. He would end his victims' lives through manual pressure, often using the victim's own hosiery as a tool. To criminal profilers, the choice of using the victim's personal belongings in their final moments was a calculated move, a way for Kang to further degrade their dignity in their last seconds of consciousness. Once the act was complete, he would dispose of the remains by burying them in remote hillsides or open fields, leaving them hidden from the world for years. What makes this case truly chilling is the sheer speed of his initial strikes, followed by a sudden, calculated disappearance. Between December 2006 and January 2007, Kang entered what investigators call his aggressive phase. In a span of just 5 weeks, he took the lives of 5 women. This is an incredibly high frequency for any serial offender, suggesting he was at the height of a dark addiction to his actions. Then, came the cool-down period, lasting from February 2007 to November 2008. After his 5th strike, Kang stopped for nearly 22 months. But why the sudden halt? Police believe he began to feel the heat from heightened law enforcement surveillance after the media started buzzing about missing students in the Huizong area. He retreated to his dog farm, lying low and waiting for the situation to cool down. However, by late 2008, the compulsion returned. Between November and December, he claimed 2 more victims before finally making a fatal mistake with his last target. Kang's methods for concealing evidence were meticulous. He didn't simply discard the remains, he buried them. He frequently carried a shovel in his trunk for this very purpose. To prevent identification, he went to extreme lengths, such as removing the victim's fingertips to ensure fingerprints could never be recovered. He also buried their clothing and personal belongings in separate locations. He specifically chose burial sites that were slated for future paving or construction, hoping his crimes would be entombed forever under layers of solid concrete. For 2 long years, a wave of paralyzing fear swept through the outskirts of Seoul. Women became terrified of being outside alone at night, and bus stops that were once bustling became desolate shadows of themselves after sunset. During this time, the police faced heavy criticism and were perceived as incompetent. Despite a mounting number of missing person reports in such a concentrated area, not a single trace of the victims could be found. The undoing of Kang Ho Sun in Gunpo on December 19, 2008, serves as a classic example of how a serial offender, one who believed he was untouchable, finally fell due to a combination of overconfidence and the rapid advancement of digital forensics. We are now going to break down the detailed chronology of how detectives managed to ensnare Kang through one single-minute mistake, a lapse in judgment that ultimately led to the total collapse of his sophisticated facade. On December 19, 2008, at around 3 p.m., a university student identified by her surname, An, was waiting at a bus stop in Gunpo, Gyeonggi Province, headed for home. Kang Ho Sun pulled up in his luxury sedan. The freezing weather, combined with Kang's seemingly warm and friendly smile, convinced him to step into the vehicle. Tragically, that would be the last time she was ever seen alive. Shortly after the encounter, Kang took a massive risk. He decided to rob his target. Just 2 hours after the abduction, Kang drove to an ATM in the Ansan area using the victim's bank card. To evade detection, he wore a wig and a mask to hide his features from the CCTV cameras. He successfully withdrew $700,001, roughly $476. Although his face remained hidden, he had unwittingly given the police exactly what they needed, a specific time and a precise location. Law enforcement immediately launched a massive sweep of highway CCTV footage along the route between the site of the disappearance and the ATM location. Detectives spotted a black luxury sedan, a Sangyong Chairman, passing through both points within a suspicious timeframe. Using big data analysis of license plates, investigators narrowed down the list of owners for that specific model within the Gyeonggi area. And there, on that list, was the name, Kang Ho Sun. As the police began their surveillance, Kang's predatory instincts kicked in. However, his reaction was so extreme that it only served to validate the detective's deepest suspicions. Upon realizing he was being watched, Kang immediately set fire to his luxury sedan. He claimed the vehicle was malfunctioning, but to the police, destroying a high-end, functional car was as good as a signed confession. Along with the vehicle, Kang also burned the clothing he had worn on the day of the incident. Despite the destruction of the sedan, investigators discovered he owned another vehicle, a utility van used for his dog farm operations. While searching the van, detectives found a winter jacket tossed carelessly onto the back seat. Kang believed he had scrubbed every trace of evidence away, but forensic experts discovered something he had missed, a microscopic stain. It was blood. DNA testing was fast-tracked, and the results were staggering. The blood on the jacket was a perfect match for An, the student from Gunpo. But the revelation didn't stop there. Forensic teams found additional genetic traces on the same jacket that matched another woman who had vanished back in 2007. Kang was officially taken into custody on January 24, 2009. While being interrogated for the recent disappearance, investigators decided to reopen the cold files from 2005. Initially, Kang remained eerily calm, denying every allegation. He even went as far as to challenge the detectives, smugly stating, "You have no evidence." However, the moment investigators placed the DNA results directly in front of him, his expression shifted drastically. He fell silent for several minutes before dryly asking for a glass of water. He realized then that destroying his luxury sedan had been in vain. The traces of his actions had remained on the one vehicle he believed was safe. On that same day, Kang finally admitted to the incident in Gunpo. However, through the masterful interrogation techniques of legendary profiler Kwon Il-yong, Kang didn't just stop at one case. He eventually confessed to the entire string of serial offenses committed since 2006. Most shockingly, he finally admitted to intentionally setting the fire that claimed his wife's life in 2005. With a chillingly cold tone, he confessed, "I did it. I used accelerants while they were asleep." He claimed he destroyed the home because he had grown bored with his marriage and was more interested in the insurance payout to fund a lavish, commitment-free lifestyle. When investigators pushed him for a motive behind his specific methods of taking life, Kang's flat, emotionless response sent shivers down their spines. He stated that watching them struggle in his final moments made him feel as though he had absolute control over the life and death of another person. Now, we will briefly cover the list of the 10 identified victims, whose lives were tragically cut short by Kang's actions. First and second, his fourth wife, identified as Chang, and his mother-in-law. Both perished in a deliberate house fire orchestrated by Kang on October 30, 2005. Investigators revealed that Kang had blocked the exits and used accelerants to ensure there was no escape. These two are considered the first phase of his spree. Third, a 45-year-old woman identified as Bae, in December 2006. An employee at a local establishment in Gunpo, she was the first target after the 2005 incident. She was offered a ride and her life was taken inside the vehicle. Fourth, a 37-year-old woman identified as Park. In December 2006. She vanished from Suwon. Kang used his signature method of manual pressure before concealing the remains on a nearby hillside. Fifth, a 52-year-old woman also identified as Park, in January 2007. A homemaker waiting for a bus in Weizong, Kang used his friendly face to persuade her to enter his car. Sixth, still in January 2007, a 20-year-old university student identified as Kim In-anson. Kang later confessed to being particularly obsessed during his encounter with this young victim. Seventh, later that same month, a 48-year-old woman identified as Yun In Suwon. She disappeared shortly after the previous incident. Kang was exceptionally active in January 2007, claiming 3 lives in a single month. 8th, in November 2008, a 42-year-old woman identified as Kim. After a hiatus of nearly 2 years, Kang returned to his dark patterns. She was abducted in Suwon. 9th, in December 2008, a 20-year-old university student identified as an in Gunpo. This was the case that became the ultimate turning point, as Kang's careless use of her bank card led to his downfall. 10th, a 23-year-old office worker identified as Kim, on September 7, 2006. This was the final case officially linked to him. Following his arrest, through intensive interrogation by profilers, Kang admitted to one more crime that took place in Jongseon, Gangwon Province. The victim worked at a local government office. Prior to his confession, her case had been treated as a standard missing person investigation. Before Kang finally admitted to the full scale of his actions, the investigation hit a wall. The police faced a grueling deadlock during the interrogation. However, the moment that deadlock was finally broken, it became one of the most significant milestones in the history of criminal profiling in South Korea. The mastermind behind this success was Kwon Il-yong, the nation's very first criminal profiler. Now, let's take a deeper look at exactly how Kwon managed to dismantle Kang's defenses and secure a total confession. According to Kwon, Kang Ho Sun was no ordinary suspect, he was a highly manipulative narcissist. He understood exactly how the legal system operated. Initially, he remained eerily cooperative. Yet he adamantly refused to admit to anything beyond the specific DNA evidence the police had already placed on the table. To break him, the profiling team utilized deep psychological tactics to crumble his walls. Kwon Il-yong recognized that Kang took immense pride in his own intelligence. Kang believed he was superior to the authorities because he had successfully evaded them for years. Instead of resorting to aggression or high-pressure tactics, Kwon adopted a calm, almost respectful approach toward Kang's perceived cleverness. The objective was clear: make Kang feel comfortable enough to speak, encouraging him to start showcasing his methods. A narcissist often finds it impossible to resist boasting about their achievements if they feel their listener is truly impressed by their brilliance. It was discovered that Kang Ho Sun was deeply concerned with his image in the eyes of his family, particularly his two sons. He desperately wanted to maintain the persona of a good father. Sensing this vulnerability, investigators informed Kang that his children were already aware of the situation and were profoundly disappointed. This revelation shook the only emotional foundation Kang had left. Once he realized his role as a respectable father had been shattered, he lost his primary motivation to continue the deception. During the interrogation, Kang often used silence as a weapon. Kwon Il-yong met him with that same silence. Kwon sat across from Kang without saying a word, simply observing his body language. His breathing patterns, and the subtle movements of his eyes. Kwon noticed that Kang was obsessed with cleanliness and his appearance, even while in custody. At one point, Kwon offered him a cup of coffee but intentionally placed it just slightly out of reach. Watching how Kang reacted to these minor inconveniences provided Kwon with vital clues as to when Kang was feeling anxious. The interrogation reached a pivotal turning point when Kwon Il-yong brought up the 2005 fire. Instead of an outright accusation, Kwon began asking about the details of Kang's grief at that time. Kwon baited him by suggesting that a man as brilliant as Kang couldn't have made such careless mistakes in a mere accident. In that moment, Kang felt challenged. Driven by a narcissistic need to prove his competence, he began to explain the details, unwittingly revealing information that only the person responsible for the fire could have known. Kwon Il-yong then shifted to a fatalistic approach. He looked at Kang and suggested that the microscopic trace of blood found on the jacket, the one detail Kang had overlooked, was not a coincidence, but rather a plea from the victims. Kwon told him, "They won't let you go. That blood is their way of speaking." Kang, who had remained cold and distant until that moment, suddenly lowered his head. He realized that his luck had finally run out. It was then that he asked for a cigarette, took a deep breath, and began to confess, revealing the locations of the burial sites one by one. Kang Ho Sun didn't just confess because of the physical evidence, he surrendered because the profiler successfully dismantled his ego. He eventually led the police to remote fields and hillsides where he had hidden his targets. Without this confession, many of those victims might never have been found, as Kang had been incredibly meticulous in how deeply he concealed them. Kwon Il-yong later wrote in his memoirs that Kang Ho Sun was one of the most chilling individuals he had ever encountered. He noted with horror how Kang could flash a warm, friendly smile just seconds after describing, in flat detail, how he had taken the lives of his victims. In 2009, the revealing of Kang Ho Sun's face became a seismic moment for both the legal system and journalistic ethics in South Korea. Prior to this case, the country maintained incredibly strict privacy laws. Even suspects of the most heinous crimes had their faces obscured by hats, masks, or digital blurring in the media. When the police finally apprehended Kang, the public expected to see someone who looked menacing or disheveled. However, two of the nation's major newspapers, the Chosun Ilbo and Jongang Ilbo, took a massive risk. They broke protocol and published uncensored photos of Kang's face on their front pages. The public was stunned. Kang possessed what many described as a handsome, well-groomed, and trustworthy appearance. This surprise quickly turned into horror as people realized it was this very normal face that had made his targets feel safe enough to enter his vehicle. Soon, the term "the handsome devil" began to circulate. The public felt betrayed by the existing privacy laws, arguing, "Why are we protecting the human rights of an offender who has so brutally stripped away the lives of so many innocent women?" This move by the media ignited a heated national debate between two sides. The pro-disclosure group, they argued that revealing a suspect's identity was a matter of public interest. They believed it helped in finding potential witnesses or other survivors and served as a powerful deterrent. The privacy rights group, this group, which included several human rights activists, feared the rise of vigilante justice and the potential negative impact on the suspect's innocent family members. However, in the case of Kang Ho Sun, the public outcry for transparency was overwhelming. Surveys at the time revealed that over 80% of South Korean citizens agreed that the identities of those behind the most heinous offenses should be fully disclosed. This surge of public indignation forced the South Korean government and the National Assembly to take decisive action. In 2010, just 1 year after his arrest, a landmark piece of legislation was passed, commonly referred to as the Specific Violent Crimes Punishment Act. Under this new law, a suspect's identity, including their name and face, could be revealed if certain strict criteria were met. First, the crime must involve extraordinary cruelty and have caused severe, irreparable harm. Second, there must be sufficient and compelling evidence linking the suspect to the act. Third, the disclosure must serve the public interest, such as preventing similar incidents or assisting in an ongoing investigation. Finally, the suspect must not be a minor or a juvenile. Since this law went into effect, the masked mystery suspects of the past have largely disappeared in high-profile cases, marking a permanent shift in how South Korea balances privacy with public safety. Following this case, police procedures underwent a permanent change. Today, if a special committee decides to disclose a suspect's identity, the authorities will intentionally allow the individual to walk past a crowd of reporters without a mask or hat, creating what is now known as the photo line. Kang Ho Sun is the reason why, today, the faces of those behind severe offenses in South Korea, including those involved in high-profile digital or physical crimes, are clearly visible in international news. For the victims' families, the disclosure of Kang's face provided a sense of emotional justice. They felt that since the victims' lives had been so publicly impacted, it was only right that the perpetrator should bear a social stigma equal to the severity of his actions. But here is a detail I find particularly fascinating. Kang Ho Sun himself actually protested the revealing of his face. While in custody, he reportedly felt immense distress because his reputation and appearance were ruined. This only further highlights his extreme narcissism. He was far more concerned with his public image than with the lives he had prematurely ended. The trial of Kang Ho Sun became a focal point for the entire nation. Throughout the proceedings, he exhibited classic traits of a clinical psychopath. He showed absolutely no remorse for his actions and even had the audacity to complain about his identity being disclosed in the media. On April 22, 2009, the Ansan District Court handed down the ultimate verdict, the death penalty. In a powerful statement, the judge declared that Kang had committed acts of extreme depravity, stripping away human dignity in a manner that left no room for rehabilitation. The court concluded that his pattern of behavior was so severe that he was beyond redemption. Kang Ho Sun's life in prison is a blend of rigid routine and intense psychological tension. As one of South Korea's most notorious offenders, his presence behind bars has created a unique and gripping dynamic. Based on reports leading into 2025 and 2026, here is an in-depth look at his life in custody. Within the prison walls, Kang is not viewed as an ordinary inmate, he holds a certain legendary status in the criminal underworld. However, this isn't due to respect, but rather the sheer scale of his actions and a narcissistic profile that remains unchanged even in a cell. Reports from former inmates and correctional officers suggest that Kang often carries an air of arrogance. He views himself as superior to petty thieves or fraudsters. He has been known to recount the details of his past actions as if they were milestones, a behavior so unsettling that even hardened inmates reportedly feel sickened by his presence. He continues to utilize the same nice guy persona he once used to lure his targets, frequently attempting to manipulate prison staff to secure slightly better facilities or preferential treatment. There are specific reasons why other inmates, even those much larger than him, tend to keep their distance. First, eyewitnesses claim Kang has the chilling ability to switch his facial expressions instantly. One moment he might be laughing, but in the next, his eyes turn cold and vacant, as if he is calculating the value of the person standing before him. Second, others fear him because he lacks an emotional break. They are aware that he acted without traditional provocation, driven solely by a distorted sense of personal satisfaction. This makes them believe he could snap at any moment if he feels his ego has been bruised. Finally, during meal times or recreation hours, Kang often sits alone. His silence is perceived by many as a form of passive intimidation. Despite his outward display of arrogance and perceived toughness, Kang Ho Sun has a clear Achilles heel, his death sentence. While South Korea maintains the death penalty on its books, the country has not carried out an execution since 1997, operating under a de facto moratorium. Nevertheless, Kang's official status remains that of a death row inmate. Whenever there is a change in government or a new, high-profile case sparks public outrage, the debate over resuming executions resurfaces in the media. It is reported that during these periods, Kang experiences overwhelming anxiety. He becomes visibly restless, constantly monitoring the news on the prison television, haunted by the possibility that his time may finally be up. Ironically, he is deeply obsessed with his physical health, maintaining a rigorous exercise routine within his cell. Criminal profilers view this as a subconscious effort to maintain control over his own body, knowing that legally, his life is already property of the state. Kang spends his days with highly methodical activities. He reads extensively, focusing particularly on books related to law and psychology. Like other inmates, he participates in mandatory work programs, yet he tends to choose tasks that allow him to work in isolation, avoiding any unnecessary social interaction. In stark contrast to his predatory nature, reports suggest that Kang has attempted to maintain communication with his children through letters. However, as the years have passed, visits from his family have grown increasingly rare. This growing social isolation is perhaps the punishment he feels most deeply, considering how fervently he clung to his persona as a good father before his true mask was dismantled. To this day, Kang Ho Sun remains behind bars as a death row inmate awaiting execution, alongside other notorious figures such as Yoo Young-chul. His case remains the primary catalyst for the South Korean government's shift in policy regarding the disclosure of a suspect's identity. It serves as a permanent reminder for the public to remain vigilant, even against those who hide their dark impulses behind a seemingly normal face. And with that, we close the book on another chilling tale from the shadows of Asia. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones in folklore, but the ones walking among us, or even the ones lurking in the quiet corners of our own minds. The world is full of unimaginable horrors and unbelievable crimes, and Asia, with its deep history and vibrant present, has more than its fair share. If you made it this far, you've got a strong stomach. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join us next time for another journey into the unsettling. Until then, keep your doors locked, and trust no one. Especially not what you think you saw in your peripheral vision just now. Stay safe out there, or try to.